Rotherham is a global and diverse community with links across the world. Similarly, Wentworth Woodhouse has been proven to have links with Asia, Africa and the USA. Research has shown that there was an international presence here at the Woodhouse with things such as the growing of camellia flowers.
So I sit within the facilities team for the property within the operations side of the business. My role within the Capital Works programme is to work with the design team and our project organiser to make sure that we're delivering a project that's suitable and sustainable for our operations teams. The Camellia House was in really poor repair, just through the adage of time basically. So when we've come in as the trust, we've had to put propping in to support the roof structure to make sure that it didn't degrade further. And as the works have progressed, we've done masonry repairs and the ironmongery repairs, as well as all of the regeneration works to turn it into the global tea house that it's going to be. So we've been running on this project now for just over 12 months, and it's taken into consideration everything from masonry repairs to the external face of the building that you can see, to the new sash windows. So the outer 6 windows are all brand new, and the inner 3, which will be the central doors, are fashioned from salvage pieces from the old windows. There's reclaimed stone flag floors gone down. We've got brand new toilet facilities gone inside. A brand new full-size adult changing places pod has been installed, as well as the commercial kitchen to facilitate the catering offer. We've a massive agenda as the Preservation Trust for our environmental sustainability. So we try to reuse materials wherever possible. The slate roofs on the back, we've used new slate to guarantee the roofs on those, which was left over from a previous project. So we've managed to utilise existing materials. We've also installed rainwater harvesting for flushing the toilets and for irrigation of the camellias. And then we've also got a ground source heat pump. So the area behind me you can see, which has been recently turned over, has the ground source heating system within it.
The groups that we're working with at the minute are asking us for green spaces, spaces that they can use that are safe for their groups to come and use. We've had a lot of social prescribing groups in because it's a nice safe space for them to be able to get together. There's lots of activities for them to do. We've also had a lot of groups asking about community gardening spaces, which is something we're looking to do soon. We're getting a lot of feedback from them about what they would like to have in there, such as raised beds, what kind of plants they might like, all sorts of accessibility requirements. So we had a group called the Warhong Association come to see us recently. They did some feedback when we were looking at getting some planning in place for an activity trail, which we have now mostly delivered. We're hoping for this to be a continuing project, so they've been to see us again recently to have a look at what we have already put in place, like balancing beams, picnic benches and space for children to play in mud huts and mud kitchens and things like that. And they had lots of other ideas going forward, like hedge mazes and things like that we can keep implementing over the next few years. We've been working with a Kashmiri group. They're wanting to do a project called Glass Lives in Glass Houses and Glass Bottles, and they're essentially looking at the history of Kashmiri people and how they used to work in glass factories and making a glass project that would then come here to the Camellia House to be exhibited. So that's sort of what we're chatting about with groups at the moment, and obviously we're always looking to expand on the groups that we're working with. Like I say, we're looking at feedback constantly. Obviously we're working with groups consistently throughout this process, but the original feedback, like I say, was on the community gardening, and we're working with students now, hopefully, to put that together. And again, we're going to get the groups involved to keep delivering on that. Just to make sure that their voices are heard, that the feedback that they are giving us is implemented along the way. A lot of other feedback we've been given is again on access requirements. Obviously with a grade 1 listed building, we are limited to the physical aspects that we can do for that, but we are always willing to learn and keep going forward with those things. We are looking at getting some funding for a lift, which obviously is going to be a long-term goal, again based on the feedback that our customers and community groups have said, so that's coming up. We've had some great feedback on the Forest of Bewilderment, lots of people engaged with that project. Again, going forward, we'll be listening to people's feedback about what they want to see. Obviously, as I previously mentioned, people are saying about a maze in there. We are hoping to work with a group to actually make that going forward, for them to not only design it, but to come and implement it so it is exactly as they want it. And we'll be looking at feedback from lots of groups for that. We're currently getting feedback on the mulberry garden, which we are hoping to turn into a tranquil space, which will have lots of sensory aspects to it. So we're looking at different plants that you can not only smell and eat, but that have got soft touches and different things like that. So we've worked with Sense on that one, we've worked with Headway on that one, and we've also worked with Rotherham Sight and Sound and Sheffield Royal Society for the Blind. And again, obviously all their feedback has come together. They want things like raised plaques so that people know what the plants are called, things like lamb's ear, which are really soft and you can feel at, things like wind chimes to make that nice sound in the background, and also things like water features that have the nice running water sound. We're also working with different groups that have got different cultural backgrounds to work with us on the menu for the Camellia House. So obviously going forward it will be a global tea house, and the groups that we're working with now are offering different ideas on tea and sweet treat combinations. We're also working with those groups to be able to provide that service, so it'll be authentically made and delivered by different groups. We've put together a community inclusion advisory group who are giving us feedback on different types of things that we can get involved with. So they are made up of figureheads from different groups who can give us advice on different things like safeguarding and different creative aspects that we can go down, and also keeping us up to date on different policies and new things that are coming into place that we can keep up to date with. It's great to have obviously their different feedback. These different people come from different walks of life and they have different life experiences, and obviously will be able to give us different opinions, and we'll be able to weigh up and make different decisions based on what they're telling us is available at the moment.
With the restoration of the Camellia House, it's great to see that a place that was once used to entertain guests is now going to be a big part of the community and the house once again. However, it does beg the question, what is the story of the Camellia?
Actually, during Queen Elizabeth I's reign, that Camellia sinensis, the tea plant, was utilized as like a trade commodity, and actually, it's really interesting as I dove into the history. Silver was the standard, and the British were so addicted to tea that they nearly went bankrupt because the Chinese recognized they didn't have to trade anything for tea. It was so valuable. And she was the one that figured out the only other thing that they would trade for was opium, and thus started the Opium Wars. It was through this sort of spice trade that, of course, tea, Camellia sinensis, was a huge part of. And, one of the stories I love to share, because first of all, my mission as a horticulturalist is to get people to see that we're all on an even playing field, right? Like we all share so much more in common than not. And so, you ask like how many people have ever had tea in their life? Well, everyone's had tea. It's the second most consumed beverage after water globally. Well, that means you have drank a camellia. That's powerful. That is something that makes everybody in the world have this camellia thing in common, right? The very first camellia that made it into the United States actually landed in Boston, which is a climate where camellias cannot be grown outside. But it lived in a conservatory because that's what a lot of Europeans were doing early on. They didn't know if these oriental plants would live outside. And so, that they were a flower of society. They landed on properties where they had orangeries and, glass houses and staff to manage these plants. And they were regarded for their beauty. And in some ways, yeah, in today's world, you can look at that as being frivolous, but I think it's also really important. It's an important heritage. And, I love that later on in the 1800s in Nantes, France, they started growing camellias outside to use as cut flowers. Buttonhole flowers were a really important part of horticulture economics. And well, when I came across the statistic that on one day in the halls of Paris, more than 100,000 stems of camellias were sold in one day, that shows the power of this plant that has intrigued people for centuries. And I just think that there's, as we evolve and as our approach to growing plants changes and the way we use them is different, it's important to recognize their heritage. And, the fact that they made it all around the world is a huge accomplishment. It's a plant that intrigues people, and because it's so incredibly beautiful, but it's also so hardy. Like, to think that these plants could be dug in Asia and live on a ship, for months at a time to cross the ocean I just think that's incredible. Camellias are, they're well adapted to milder climates. They don't love super freezing temperatures. And I did work for a long time on breeding for cold hardiness. Our goal at Camellia Forest was to make them reliably evergreen and blooming into zone 6, where you can have sustained temperatures, well below freezing for, weeks of time in the winter. And the thing is, camellias are a broadleaf evergreen. They prefer a humid environment. That's their native environment is relatively humid. But they are well adapted to have periods of extreme wet and periods of dry. And that's, I think, one of the reasons that they've been so long lasting as landscape plants, because they set a pretty reasonable root system. And they can be cut all the way to the ground and just reflush like magic. And, overall, their pest and disease problems aren't extremely difficult. And of course, this is like the plant perspective. When you look at the flowering, you've got different species that are going to flower at different times. Of course, sasanquas are very popular for their fall blooming. Sinensis, which at least in my region starts blooming really as early as now. I actually have tea plants that are already starting to bloom. And it's one of the plants that the bees love the most in my garden. So it's actually a really important pollinator plant when we look at today's perspective of the climatic challenges and just our overall ecosystem. Having a plant that supports insects is really valuable. But you get to the queen of the camellias, the Camellia japonica or Camellia japonica reticulata hybrids, where you've got these huge, flowers that are like the size of a dinner plate, and they make you stop in your tracks. And they definitely prefer to be in a climate that isn't having hard freezes through the winter season. They are triggered to bloom with short days and cooler weather, milder weather. They set their flower buds on the spring flush, slightly hardened. So, you're looking at them putting their next year's flowers out on the stalks right now. I'm looking now, evaluating how many flowers am I going to have in the winter as I look at my established shrubs. And then you kind of wait breathlessly until January, February, March, when they start to put on their show.
Wentworth Woodhouse and the families that have lived here have always had a strong connection with the local community. This has been evident in the parties and gatherings that were hosted here, such as in 1888 when 3,000 people made up of miners and their families were invited to a garden party, and as the gates were opened, so were thousands of local people as well. Then there was a fete to celebrate the christening of the Viscount Milton in February 1911, which saw 7,000 guests in attendance, as well as 17,000 sandwiches being served and 1,500 gallons of tea being drunk. Whilst these parties are obviously quite extravagant in scale, they have always involved the local community in them and have had numerous guests, ranging from the Prince of Wales to, in 1916, injured war veterans. They were entertained at specific places here at the house, such as the Camellia House. The oldest part of that building dates back to 1738, and it was where Lady Rockingham would have entertained her guests. The glazed area was then used to house camellia flowers. With the restoration of the Camellia House, it's great to see that there are going to be plenty more opportunities here at Wentworth Woodhouse for visitors. Plus, there is always a place in the local community for Wentworth Woodhouse, and the research has shown that this place has a link to the international community as well. However, there is more to Wentworth Woodhouse than just the Camellia House, and there is more to be done and discovered, and this is just one part of its very big story.